Welcome back to another episode of this Standish Woodstory. Today I'm going to show you how to turn this rustic piece of walnut into a beautiful makeup and brush organizer. Follow along to see how. I started by selecting my wood. I'll be using walnut, but this makeup organizer can be made with any type of wood. Just avoid using construction lumber as the moisture level is usually too high and it can cause your project to warp later on. This organizer is going to measure approximately 30 by 20 centimeters, and it will be about 8 centimeters tall at its highest point. And if you're the type of person who prefer to have the plans in your hands, then jump right down into the description below where I have listed the direct link to these plans. I took quite a bit of time measuring out my cuts because I knew I had to join my wood first, and I really hate jointing wood that is longer than 4 feet. And this board was almost 8 feet long, but I also didn't want to waste unnecessary wood, so I took my time measuring out all the shapes and made the cuts on my miter saw. Then I started the jointing and planing fun. I was left with 2 pieces, one measuring 43 centimeters and the other one measuring 85 centimeters long, and both were about 15.5 centimeters wide. This is after jointing the wood. I cut my smaller 43 by 15.5 piece in half, giving me 2 pieces that were measuring 21.5 centimeters by 15.5 centimeters. I'm going to glue together these 2 pieces because I need to achieve that final size of 30 by 20 centimeters. And because I knew that I had to glue together these 2 pieces to make the bottom board, I actually only planed my wood down to about 1.27 centimeters instead of the 1 centimeter that I need at the end, because this will allow me to run the boards through the planer once the glue has dried, and it will save me some valuable sanding time later on. Next was cutting my pieces to size. Most of these were a breeze to cut as it's really just all rectangles. However, the side pieces need a tapered edge going from 8 centimeters down to 3.5 centimeters. I realized at this point that I was a little short on materials, so I got creative cutting out my 2 side pieces using one large rectangular piece, marking the 2 shapes, and using a bandsaw to cut in between the 2 lines. Once I had my 2 shapes, I redrew the size I needed using a permanent marker. I cut away the excess again on the bandsaw, and then all I had to do was attach a straight piece of scrap wood with some painter's tape and CA glue, and then I could use my router with a bearing bit to cut it to the exact size it needed to be, making it perfectly straight at the same time. With all my cuts made to size, it was time to grab the sander and work my way from 80 grit all the way down to 220, making sure to water pump the last layer and resanding it to get it nice and smooth. I used a strap clamp to secure the pieces together and got them ready for gluing. I worked piece by piece, starting with the back side, then the sides, and I left the front side not glued. This is because I am anticipating needing to cut off a hair from the final size to get a really nice tight fit. So this will allow me to make some adjustments when the other pieces are glued together. But having the piece there now also allows me to keep everything nice and squared up during the glue up. I always wipe away excess glue while it's still wet. This saves a ton of time sanding later on, especially in the hard-to-reach areas. I allowed the box to dry overnight before removing the clamps, and as expected, my bottom board was sticking out just a tiny bit. So I brought it over to my bandsaw to trim away a very small amount. Then I was able to glue the front piece to the box and get a nice tight fit. Once dry again, I sanded the box and started working on the inside parts. I measured my final inside measurement, which was just a hair under the 28 centimeters, and I made my final cut on the table saw. I also wanted the inside divider piece to have the same angle as the tapered sides, so I used my angle guide and then set my table saw to this angle and cut off a little bit from the top to give it this exact angle. Next came the brush holder portion. I'm cutting this from one piece, but I'm going to wait to cut it to size until later on. I marked my holes and I drilled out 2 different sizes of holes. I did quite the hack job on the non-exposed side, which was in pretty rough shape afterwards. I should have used painter's tape to prevent some of this tear out, but at least this side will be hidden. Once the holes were cut and fully sanded, I cut it to size and proceeded to glue it to the box. Next, I added the divider piece, which fully encases the brush holder. I made sure to give this piece the same 13-degree angle as before. I was left with a smaller divider, and I had an extra little scrap piece that I decided to add as an additional middle divider. I glued it all up, sanded it for about 2 chapters of my audiobook, wiped it all down, sanded it again, and then finally it was ready to be sealed. I'm using a boiled linseed oil, and the first layer already shows how beautiful this black walnut really is. This particular wood was harvested more than 2 generations ago by a local farmer's dad, and then it was stored in a barn for about 40 years, so it definitely deserved being turned into a piece that will be treasured for decades to come. And just like that, this makeup organizer and brush holder was done, and I think it turned out just beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this wood story. Don't forget to grab your copy of the digital step-by-step plans down in the description, and like and subscribe for more wood stories.